The mind of the infant grows at a rapid rate. We cannot see him, but we can see evidences in his reactions to the world about him. Reactions take forms of behavior, and these patterns of behavior grow just as certainly and as marvelously as his body. At birth, their growth is well underway, but at the age of 8 weeks, many patterns of behavior are still immature. In the bath, the infant cannot splash with his hands yet. He is too immature, but he has the beginnings of a good leg stroke. When he lies on his back, he keeps his head turned to the side. At this age, he cannot hold his head long in the mid-position. But look at him. When he is 1 year old, he kneels, he stands, and he explores. He turns his head alertly in all directions. He no longer stares at his mother. He reacts to her as a person. Such changes in his behavior patterns virtually constitute his early mental growth. In order to investigate the nature of this growth, we have made systematic records of infant behavior by means of this photographic dome at the Yale Clinic of Child Development. The dome is encased in a one-way vision screen. The infant is examined in a crib. On the tabletop, we place stimulus objects to call forth his characteristic patterns of behavior. Let us turn back to an infant boy at the age of 12 weeks and see what patterns of behavior are revealed in test situations. First, a simple postural test. When he is pulled to a sitting position, his head lags and drops forward. His back curves. At 16 weeks of age, his head is steadier, his trunk more rigid, and his back is not so uniformly rounded as it was at 12 weeks. This is due to the advancing organization of his growing nervous system. At 20 weeks, he erects his head nicely when he's brought to the perpendicular position. He can move his trunk slightly and can sit a moment without support when he is allowed to lean forward. We return again to the 12 weeks level of maturity and place the infant in a Morris chair before the tabletop. His hands rest flat. He looks at the table for a while, and then his eyes shift to the surroundings and to his own hand. The examiner presents a cube. The infant looks at the examiner's incoming hand, looks at the surroundings, and then at the cube. And then again at the examiner's hand, and then fixates on the cube. He maintains this fixation. His hands make mild flexion movements, but he does not touch the cube. We will summarize these 12 weeks' reactions by means of an animated diagram. The hands rest on the table. He looks at the table. He looks at his own hand. He looks at the examiner's incoming hand and outgoing hand. He looks at the examiner, then at the cube. He lifts his hand. He looks at his own hand again. In the brief span of the next 4 weeks, these patterns undergo pronounced development. At 16 weeks of age, he sits more firmly in his chair, looks more alertly at the examiner and at the cube. His glance shifts rapidly from cube to hand. there seems to be an almost vexatious rivalry between the stimulus power of the cube and of the hand. He contacts the cube, but cannot by a forward thrust secure it. When we insert one cube in the infant's left hand and present a second cube, you see the same general pattern of behavior repeating itself. He drops the first cube, looks at the second cube, at his own hand, and again at the cube, and his regard shifts. His hands close in, but he cannot make a forward-reaching thrust. Similarly, when three cubes are presented, the patterns of behavior remain much the same. But in 4 more weeks, you will note an advance. At 20 weeks, his postural capacities, including head control, have progressed decidedly. He is a better sitter. He has discovered his feet, and he strains toward them, an interesting growth manifestation of behavior patterning. He looks more alertly at the examiner, regards the cube more promptly, brings both hands together, and contacts the cube when it is near enough. He even puts one palm on top of the cube and prehends it momentarily. He can corral the cube, but cannot grasp it by direct approach. In the two-cube situation, you see the same pattern in the early stage of prehension. The features of his cube behavior at 20 weeks will be summed up by another animated diagram. The baby looks at the examiner, and after delay, looks at the cube. He brings both hands together, but misses the cubes. He swings his hands out. He brings them to the midline again. This time he contacts the cube because it is nearer, seizes it, lifts it, but it drops. And now, the cinema, by its unique power, presents to you simultaneously the self-same infant at 12 weeks and 16 weeks of age. In this comparative view of the younger and the older sets of behavior patterns, you have a revealing glimpse into the nature of behavior growth. You see greater complexity and superior coordination in the older infant. The 16 weeks old infant is manifestly more alert and more reactive, even though he only contacts the cube. And now, by the method of double or coincident projection, we have another comparison. The 16 weeks behavior picture is now at the left, the 20 weeks behavior picture at the right. Again, you see a definite developmental discrepancy in the two sets of behavior patterns. The difference between these two age levels constitutes an increment of mental growth. The 20 weeks old infant, in every respect, is more mature. The patterns of behavior are determined fundamentally by the maturity of the infant. The infant cannot go beyond the limits set by the natural immaturity of his nervous system. At 20 weeks, therefore, the infant reacts to 10 cubes in almost the same way that he reacts to 1 cube. And you see the familiar patterns of finger flexion, corralling, and momentary hand inspection. Time, however, transforms these behavior patterns, and at the age of 1 year, the infant grasps the cubes with skill and exploits them with versatility. These progressive changes in the patterning of cube behavior give us a true indication of how the mind of the infant matures.